Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the August meeting of the virtual chapter. We are so excited to be here with you today. We are so excited to be anywhere today. I came back from Hypno Thoughts on Spirit Airlines.
Yeah, that's right.
You need to laugh.
So, it took me a couple of days to get home, and so I'm thrilled to be home and to be here to do this. We've got an exciting program for you today. I'm looking forward to talking a little bit later in the program with Jeffrey Richards, who is, well, a wonderful guest, and you'll get a chance, if you don't know him already, to discover just how true that is. And in the meantime, just a couple quick announcements I think we need to make. First of all, if you're listening to this program, whether it's recorded or whether you're here now or both, by the way, you can actually, I think, add them together. Isn't that cool? You can get CEUs for the number of hours that you spend with this program. So if you're having computer trouble, you could probably get 10 hours worth of credit just for working your way through this recording. So do be sure and do that. If you're a member of Icon 9DHA, just go out to their website, and when you put in your member's ID and stuff, it pulls up a page where you can indicate, I spent some time with Michael and Karen listening to that Jeffrey Richards guy, and I think that I should be compensated in some way for that. And they will give you the appropriate amount of credit. Just let them know how much time you spent here, and that's all it takes. And other friendly, we like to say, other friendly hypnosis organizations will also give you credit if you just
absolutely.
Yeah. And is there anything else, Karen, other than the calendar?
I don't think so. We have a couple of announcements, but when you're ready to do that.
Okay, well, that's in fact where I'm ready to go. And because I was struggling with my computer, so I hope maybe, Karen, you can help me just a little bit with this. I didn't get all of the dates for the things that are in the calendar, but I will tell you that coming up in September, next month, I believe it's about the third weekend of September. So if you're a member of the association, look there, you'll see stuff, is the Galaxy of the Stars. And, we do that twice a year. And the Galaxy of the Stars is, this time, we have a special theme. It is the spirit of hypnosis. And so we're getting into things a little more esoteric and, than we normally do. We're going to have Paul Arand and Sophie Kramer, and they're going to talk about past lives and life between lives, and, and do some great things. And then we'll have Roy Hunter for a half a day. And then you'll have doing spiritual hypnosis, which is a topic that he does quite often in different places. Perhaps you have already seen some of that. And then you'll also have me for a half a day presenting some new material that I'm really excited to share with you about working with dreams with clients and inducing dreams in hypnotic sessions, stuff like that. It's going to be wonderful. So check it out. Like I said, I believe that it is the third weekend of September, and I apologize that I don't have the dates. The next thing, so not quite to Chicago yet, but the next thing is the second and third, or whatever that is, the very first weekend in October, is the IACT Stress Management Consultant Training. That's a 2-day training program. Once again, with yours truly, I'm going to be working this month, I guess. And then Karen, what's after that?
What's after that is I've got to start with, I start an IACT, IMDHA, or other organizations certification training. That starts October 9th, and that runs through 2 conferences, the Mid-America Hypnosis Conference, which is October 15th, 16th, and 17th this year. It's virtual. And then the training runs for several months and culminates in February at the ICBCH Hypnosis Conference. And I do that because I like to expose my students not only to my style and what I want them to know, but the fact that there are a lot of styles, and I'm not trying to make them me, I'm trying to make them a great hypnotist. So I get to see a lot of different kinds of styles and figure out where they want to specialize or what direction they want to go. That is what's happening in October 15th, 16th, and 17th is Mid-America.
Great. And that is always a wonderful, wonderful conference. So be sure to do that one. And also, I just want to mention, and it's a couple months out yet, 3 months out yet. I just happen to be the president of an organization called the Hypnosis Education Association here in Florida. I was the president 20 years ago, and now I'm the president again. So on the return trip, And we're doing all kinds of exciting things. You know, we've been online for the last couple of years for the last 3 of our conferences for this group because it's meets a couple of times a year. If you're in Florida, usually it's a live event. And I mentioned community earlier. The thing that I love about the HEA is it really is that, you know, it was actually an organization that was started out of a bunch of students of 1 or 2 teachers that all kind of knew each other. So it started out as a bunch of friends who gradually invited, you know, more people that, you know, that were friends and so on. And by the way, even if you're not a friend yet, you know, they are just friends you haven't met yet. So if you're in Florida, get involved with the HEA. I think you'll find it a wonderful thing. And if you're not in Florida, we have a lot of members that are out of the state. You know, they can't come to the conference, but when we do Zoom things, of course, you know, they can come to those. And the conferences are all recorded, and anybody that registers for them gets all the recordings from the conferences as well. So just some good hypno learning for y'all. So for y'all, because we're down here in Florida, for all of y'all, every single one of y'all. And I think that's just a great thing. So that's the second weekend in November that it's actually going to happen. You'll be seeing some more stuff about it between now and then. So that's all I can think of.
That's all so far. That's getting us up pretty close to the end of the year. December coming up, by the way, for the virtual chapter will be our Christmas party. And we're going to do the Christmas party the same way that we have done it the last couple of years, which is really fun. It's a Christmas buffet. So we'll have several different people in doing a technique or a tip or something like that in our Christmas buffet. So mark that on your calendar to be sure and be here in December with us.
Small plates hypnosis.
I like that. Tapas hypnosis.
Tapas hypno.
Which sounds like topless, and it could bring more people to the meeting. You never know.
Well, you never know. Yeah. And like I said, we've run into that in the past. So, you know,
well, that's true. We don't advertise it usually, but
all right. Well, then, so we are getting on with our program. There's Karen and I, and Jeffrey as well, and perhaps some other folks on the call have just returned. Hopefully, the rest of you not with spirit from Hypnothoughts Live, where there were lots of exciting things going on, a lot of people to meet, and a lot of great presentations. And we just thought it might be a nice idea to kind of talk about some of the things that we're learning and picking up along the way, and what we especially liked or enjoyed about that. So Karen, did you have a good time?
I did. I had a blast. And one of the things I liked most, well, I liked a lot of things about Hypnothoughts, but I'm just bringing a few to the table right now to share with you because they might be things you can use. One of the things I liked was what we got in our goodie bag, our purple backpack from Randy Light, Enlightened Hypnosis. She put in this little, purple plastic band. Everybody's got one of those bands, right? I don't know why she ripped off Jason Lynette's color, but yeah, she did a purple band with her, Enlightened Living on it, and a little card that she put in. And it's a lovely way to teach self-hypnosis because she gives the instructions on here. Number 1, put the bracelet on your wrist. Number 2, when you catch yourself saying something negative or critical about yourself, say stop. Number 3, immediately change your statement to something positive and truthful. 4, take the bracelet off your wrist, put it on your other wrist. And then doing all of that, you were suddenly thinking positive thoughts about yourself. It's just a pattern interrupt. But what a cool thing. And if you give that to clients, don't you think that would be a cool thing to give them as homework to do if they are negative thinkers? It's one cool way to make something like that work. And lots of people have these cheap little tchotchkes that they could use, or a rubber band, right? My friend Carm Blackenary, who 180 days ago, he's the chairman of the Mid-America Conference, had open heart surgery, a quadruple bypass, I think, and still showed up at Hypnothoughts. Wow, I don't know if you guys saw the lights just blink. We're having thunderstorms and tornadoes in Chicago tonight. Something just took a hit. Carm always he's famous for Carm pens. And this is something he hands out to his clients. It's just, a ballpoint pen. But on the pen, and you can buy this from any pen tchotchke company, along with his marketing, his information, there are the words terrific, outstanding, amazing, perfect, fabulous, best, I'm sorry, because of the lights here, I'm having a hard time reading them, but all around these are wonderful, positive words. Calm instructs people to, when you have negative thoughts, read your pen. Just read it. Read it a couple of times. If you want to, say the words out loud. And you can't think negative thoughts. You can't think two things at the same time. So if you're thinking fabulous, terrific, outstanding, amazing, perfect, if you're thinking those things, how nice is that? And then if you read them a couple of times and you add in the I am statement, I am fabulous, I am terrific, I am confident, I am amazing, I am perfect, I'm terrific. You start feeling pretty darn good about yourself, don't you? Carm used to have a whole bunch of these pens. Every time I saw Carm, which was often, I got a pen. I gave them to my clients with the instructions to do that with his marketing on it. We do very different hypnosis styles, so I didn't think I was going to lose clients to him. I think there's plenty of clients for all of us, but I liked it so much I gave it to my clients with his marketing on it. Carm found out about that, and because he's a wonderful man, he had a bunch printed up with Mid-America Hypnosis Conference on it, which I'm on the board, and so I started giving those out to my clients. It was a little more beneficial to me, but it really didn't matter. It just didn't matter because the goal was to teach them to do a pattern interrupt and think better thoughts. I want to talk about Sean Carson, Sean and Sarah Carson and Jess Marion. I don't know if you've ever been to a conference where you see their table, but they've written about 1,000 books. And the table is just covered with all of their magnificent manuscripts. And at HypnoThoughts, Sean was off to the side and reading tarot cards. Sorry, I hear my dog because of the thunder. I don't know if you can hear the thunder. It's okay, Chico, come here. He was reading tarot cards. And Sean used it as a way to, excuse me, Chico, step out. Good boy. Sean used it as a way of drawing attention to their booth, right? And to get to know people, because you're getting their metaphors. You're understanding things about them as you're helping them figure out some issue or read the tarot cards. Very cool thing. They do that in the office too. I don't necessarily want to do tarot card reading in my office, but I'm just saying all sorts of other ancillary things can certainly also have something to do with hypnosis and draw attention to yourself. I want to remind everybody to refer when necessary or when you can. Last time I was anywhere, which was February of 2020 until this travel time, I was in Vegas at the ICBCH conference, and I was down in the casino getting a cup of coffee. And someone who heard that there were a bunch of hypnotists in the Orleans asked me, oh, my daughter is a gymnast and she's having some trouble with a couple of things. And I wonder if there's anyone who could, in hypnosis, help her. And I said, oh my God, you know, almost anybody can, but I know a woman who works with Olympic athletes and she's right here at this conference, Joni Knighty. And I said, if you'll come upstairs, I'll introduce you. I introduced her to Joni Knighty and they talked, and her daughter became one of Joni's clients. And at this conference, at HypnoThoughts Live, Joni was watching that client that I referred to her at the Olympics. So phenomenal work. So when it really does your heart good when you refer somebody, and especially to a specialist, and look how well it helped that person. And what's that person, that Olympic gymnast, saying to everybody about hypnosis? Wow, good stuff, right? And finally, I only have one more thing, and that is when I present, I'm sorry for you guys, this is a casual thing. I don't put on makeup or really do my hair. I'm sorry. I love you guys, but when I present in front of a conference group, I like to think about my colors. I do my hair, I put on makeup, I do the whole thing. And so the first day I presented, I had a 4-hour workshop where I really wanted to bond with my workshop group. And so I wore blue because blue is one of those subconscious colors of trust. On Sunday, I was speaking about something else having to do with hypnosis. Really, what is hypnosis? I think it's all BS. Belief system. I'm not dissing hypnosis, okay? It's belief system. It's all in the belief system. But I wore black and red. I wore my red shirt and a black jacket, and everything was perfect. The hair was done. I did my presentation. I was back at the vending table, and I was sitting there talking to somebody, and I happened to look down and notice that I was wearing a pair of old Birkenstocks that I bring to the hotel just to wear around the hotel room, that I don't want to be seen in public with. I even saw pictures of myself on Facebook in these raggedy ass shoes. And I thought, oh my God, there's the whole presentation blown, right? I talked to Melissa Tears. She has beautiful shoes sometimes. And we were laughing about it. I said, I looked down and thought, oh my God, I blew the whole thing. And she said, you know what we can discover from this? It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference, except consider this. I noticed that later when I was at the vending table. I don't know for sure. I wonder what would have happened if I would have looked down and noticed that right before I did my presentation. What kind of things would I have been saying to myself? Oh my God, how could I be so stupid as to put on the wrong shoes? Everybody's going to think I'm an idiot. What would have happened if I would have noticed that 1 minute before the presentation? Well, that's when you need Carm's pen. That's when you need Randy's bracelet. Oh no, I'll be fine. It doesn't make any difference. Nobody notices your shoes, right? That's when we have to bring ourselves up. But it did bring into mind how we use hypnosis for and against ourselves all the time. That self-talk that we do is hypnosis. I don't care if you've talked yourself into it or not. Once you say something like that or see something like that, whatever triggers, right, becomes self-hypnosis. That's the kind of thing we want to help our clients understand and know too, that they can talk themselves into a state, good or bad, and they can change that state as soon as they become aware of it. Okay.
And by the way, their unawareness of it, by the way, is another example of hypnosis. And Karen is the one that will tell you, and she says it every time we're on the internet, on the interweb. She says, what is it that you say? Oh, it's all hypnosis. Everything's
hypnosis. Everything's hypnosis.
I think that's an interesting thing, and this really kind of came home to me at Hypnothons this year as well. Is that I have a belief, we've all taken our trainings and stuff, and I had to start out my class this time. I've got to admit, I had to start out my class on a bad note, and I'm so sorry that happens. But I told the people in the audience, I said, I've got some bad news and some good news for you. And Karen, should I tell them the bad news? Because you need to know.
You have to tell it. You have to.
They need to know. Well, the bad news is that Milton Erickson, let me cross myself because I love Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson is dead. And you know what? And that's terrible. So it's a hard way to start a presentation because some people didn't know that yet. They didn't seem to know that yet. And then I doubly, hurt them because then I had to let them know that Dave Ellman was dead as well. And again, some people didn't know that yet, but what they know is that Dave Ellman and Milton Erickson did some interesting things in hypnosis. And whenever they're trying to figure out what to do, there's some meta program or a virtual question or something that people are asking themselves. And it's like, what would Milton do? Or what would Ellman do? Or well, like I said, if Dave Ellman were alive today, Dave Ellman would not be doing what he was doing 50 years ago. And he's been dead for that long. 50 years, count them, wait, that's only 10. Wait, okay, let me make sure I do it right. But 50 years and Erickson 50 years. And what we really need is a way to sort of remodel the way that we think about hypnosis. When Ellman taught, he taught a very specific method, and he said, "This is how it works." And people went, "Yes, this is how it works. I will be baptized in your religion." And then Milton Erickson taught some things, and the Ericksonians came to a number of conclusions, and this is how it works. And I said, "Yes, absolutely. Let me join your religion." Oh, wait, I can't join your religion because you don't have a subconscious mind, and I can't join your religion because you don't have somnambulism. And then we started fighting with each other. And the whole hypnosis community gets all crazy about these distinctions when the truth of the matter is we have forgotten that it's all a metaphor. We've come up with a whole lot of interesting words and ways to talk about this experience, the function of which is to change the way that your client relates to some unwanted experience that they've been having, and to allow them to be able to relate to it in a new way that will let them go forward more resourcefully. That's what we're trying to do. And the interesting thing is there are a million ways to do that. So whenever anybody says to me, this is the way you got to do it like this, it's like, no, but what you've got to do is accomplish this. And the way that you're doing it, we don't need to diss each other, because the way that everybody's doing it is just fine. It's just fine if it accomplishes the objective of hypnosis. But I think sometimes we think that things work, not for the real reasons that they work, that they actually work because we have created or allowed for the creation of new representations in the minds of our clients, and that lets them have a different experience going forward. I always quote this thing from John Grinder, who says, what you need to produce change is congruity and a ritual. And it doesn't matter what the hell the ritual is, as long as it is acceptable in the mind of the client as a vehicle to move them from one way of thinking to another. So you can put your mother in a chair and tell her all those things that you needed to say, or you could just make her black and white. There are any number of options available to us in order to be able to make that change. So I think it would be really great for us to learn, and I hope we are learning, to, rather than evaluate what other people say by whether it's in agreement with the way that we were taught, to figure out how to add it in, because that's what's going on out there. So anyway, that was an important learning for me. The other one, I wonder if you'll indulge me for a half a second here in one little thing, only because I want this to be on the record. I want this to be public. Okay. I did something in my presentation that I didn't realize had happened at the time. It was a very interesting thing, and it's continued to haunt me. And I've got to find the guy's name so that I can get back to him about it. But it stays with me, because those of you who know me know, I'm just full of crap most of the time. I have a lot to say, and and my tongue is firmly planted in my cheek most of the time, right? So I'm doing my presentation, and before we started, I'm blind in my left eye, and before I started, I was the sound guy, came up to me and he handed me this microphone with a long cord attached to it that was going to be down here on the floor to the left of me, and I'm going to be moving back and forth across the front of the room. And I said, hey, this is kind of scary, I'm going to fall on my ass if I, with this. And he said, well, for you, he said, he didn't let everybody have them because they only had a couple, but he says, I've got a wireless one that you can use. And he put this wireless mic on me and everything was fine. My assistants in my room didn't know that had happened. When I got into my presentation, and I was about 10 or 15 minutes in, and I began to do a demonstration with somebody, and the demonstration was going on. And all of a sudden, one of the assistants, I saw in my periphery, I have periphery in my right eye, I saw him sneaking up on me, because that's how they do, to be as inobtrusive as possible, to let me know that he was concerned that I wasn't mic'd, because the mic was lying over there in another part of the room. I thanked him, I says, oh, great. I'm fine. I've got this wireless. Everything is good. And he moved away, and I turned back to the person that I was doing the demonstration with. And I said, now, where were we? I said, before we were, it's terrible when I hear myself say it now. I don't believe I'm confessing this. This is confession time. So thank you, folks. I said, before we were so rudely interrupted. And it was just a throwaway comment of me being a smartass, and that's all that it was, and in fact, so much so that I forgot that it had happened. When at the end of the program, the guy came up to me and he said, "Oh, Michael," he says, "I'm so sorry that we interrupted you during your demonstration," and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, it was no big deal." Then I was talking to somebody later who was the other assistant. And he said, "Boy, I'm sure glad we got a chance to sit down and visit with each other, and I got to know you, because when I was in your class yesterday, I thought you were, a real ass because you were so abusive to that assistant." like, oh my goodness. So if he's listening, if you ever look at this YouTube video, my friend, and remember this, because I still don't even know your name yet, please, it was not that. And I am so sorry. And now I can't be governor of any state. I'm done in for that. So there's my confession. We learn these things about presentations. The other thing I learned as a presenter, by the way, and I don't know what your strategies are, I take pages and pages of notes. I wake up in the middle of the night with 3 or 4 more lines that I squeeze into that. That was a typewritten page once, and now it's got notes and stuff added to it and arrows and things pointing all over the place. I don't know if any of you guys do that. But what I've learned to do is to do that all the way up until an hour or so before the presentation, and then just put my notes aside and forget about them. So I've noticed that it's my preparation strategy. If I tried to read those notes, they wouldn't make much sense. So, but I really appreciate that when I don't do all of that, I haven't sort of stirred the pot in the way that I need to. So for me, that's a useful strategy. There we go. Hypnothoughts Live and the many learnings. And the other one, of course, is Never Fly Spirit Airlines.
Hypnothoughts in a nutshell. Never fly Spirit anywhere.
Yeah. So there we go. And all of that said, do you have anything else, Karen, before we? No,
I do not. I think
Well,
we've
then-
shared it.
Well, then I think it is time for us to introduce our speaker, our guest tonight, who is Jeffrey Richards. And I've known, by the way, yeah, as I said, I had trouble printing out his bio, but I know that he's a practitioner and a master practitioner and a licensed trainer of neurolinguistic programming. I know that he works with sports enhancement, I believe, and smoking cessation. And you'll have to tell us when we get started, Jeff, what the third thing was, but that I have spaced out. But and what I know is that I met him at the very first Hypnothoughts, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to see if I was right about that. I think it was the very first one. And you're Jeffrey, a delight to know. And you guys, if you don't know him yet, don't tell him I said so, because otherwise I wouldn't be the kind of a smartass that I am. But he really is one intelligent fella. And I'm sure that will be obvious to you as he begins to talk. So you might have to, I have to turn up my IQ just a little bit in order to follow along, and I'm looking forward to do that. So without further ado, welcome, Jeffrey. We're glad to have you with us tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. You're right. We did meet at the very first Hypnothoughts. It was. And they did things a little bit differently at that first conference. I think it was at the reception the first night. It was a much smaller thing than it's become. There were, I don't know, maybe 300-400 people there. And that was kind of nice because you got to at least have the potential to meet everybody,
Yeah.
which really hasn't been possible until I guess last year when I was unable to attend, and almost this year. But the way I remember the story, and Michael and I have talked about this a couple of times, is a little different than the way he remembers it. It's mostly the same. I was wandering around. I only knew a couple of people there, and it was the people who, my dog just found his squeaky toy. That'll be fun. It was the people who ran the thing. And I'm wandering around, and Michael's sitting at a table and looks up. And the way I remember the story is he says, "You don't look like a complete idiot. Come over and sit down."
Well, there you go. There's yet another example. Well, and Jeffrey, and you're not a complete idiot.
No, I'm not.
That's exactly
7/8 of the time. So
yeah. So I was really fascinated when I saw Jeff's topic. I just called you Jeff, by the way. Do people do that?
no. Yeah, Jeff is fine. That's what I go by.
Oh, okay. Oh, I never realized. I tend to go by their proper names.
Jeff, Jeffrey. There's a subset of people who knew me freshman year in college who call me Phil, because there was another guy on my floor named Jeff. And Lisa Clements, who was in charge of doling out nicknames that year, looked up to me and says, "You look more like a Phil than a Jeff." And there are people to this day who call me Phil. So
That's great.
So interesting to know. At the next conference. Out of the blue.
So, this idea of telling stories in hypnosis is a big deal, right? And a lot of folks have taken courses and read books and things about how to create metaphors and how to use them therapeutically and all of that stuff. And then I see that Jeffrey has a method. Now I got to be careful about this because I don't know the details yet, but something that seems to be, systematic, a nice, easy way to do this, because he calls it the four corners method. And to me, that just sounds very comforting to begin with for creating metaphors. So I'm really, really enrolled and interested to hear where that goes. And by the way, selfishly, I have to tell you, I wasn't able to be in Jeffrey's presentation at the conference. So that's why I invited him here. I thought, hey, if you can't go to the mountain, you got to bring Mohammed onto the virtual chapter. And
Brilliant. Yes.
but let's start out with a couple things, Jeffrey. First of all, because I want to let people know a little bit about who you are and how you got here. I suppose I know how you might have gotten here, but how you got here.
Okay.
In hypnosis and stuff. You've been doing hypnosis a long while, yes?
I have last Thanksgiving-ish, was 20 years. Started my training in the IMDHA with Ann Spencer up in Troy, Michigan. I did those classes live. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. And I had taken a 3-day class in NLP and related topics. I get the title wrong every time. I think I simply like my version of it better. It was taught by Rex Steven Sykes. Rex is still around. And it was called more or less how to get people to do what you want without nagging, pleading, guilt tripping, or whining. I'm getting some of those verbs wrong, but it's close. And this was amazing to me. It was eye-opening. I did not realize that there was a systematic way to think about communication. And I wanted to know more about this. More to the point, I looked around the room and everybody there, and there was a good number of people, maybe, 50, 60, 70 people. It was a long time ago. And every single person, with the exception of one guy who was drugged there by his girlfriend, was there because they wanted to be there, because they were having a good time, because they were already cruising along through life pretty much okay. They just wanted to do better. And I thought, what a wonderful concept. What a wonderful thing to have happen. And because I can count and do math, and I knew what the class cost, I had a fairly decent idea what the instructor was making. I wanted his job. He was having a really good time helping people who were already doing well do better. Who wouldn't want that job? But this was couple of years before the Society of NLP sort of rejiggered their training requirements. This is back when Master Prac and Practitioner were 21 contiguous days in a place that I do not live. And between the time commitment and the financial obligation, I couldn't swing it. But there were a couple of hypnotists in that class. And like I said, this is all brand new to me. And they said, well, a lot of NLP comes out of modeling hypnotists. And I thought, well, I can't really do any more NLP training right now. Let's see who's offering hypnosis training near me. And near me turned out to be defined as a 4-hour drive each way between Columbus and Detroit, because our interstate highway runs the other diagonal through the state. And so I would leave work early on Friday evening and drive up to Detroit and check into the hotel and do my class Saturday, Sunday, drive back Sunday night, go back to work Monday morning, forget everything that I learned over the weekend, and then drive back up the following weekend. It's not really a way I'd recommend to learn hypnosis or anything at all, because none of my friends were interested in the least tiny little bit in letting me practice with them. And this was before Meetup. This was before the internet. So I got a certificate out of it, got a piece of paper. I was certified, but I didn't really know how to do a whole lot. That's not on Ann, that's on me. But I kept going. I saw the potential. I knew what was going on. Got my NLP training because it got shortened down to a time length that I could handle. Trained with a lot of other really good people. And somewhere along the way, I met Scott Sandlin and David Snyder and Richard Clark and Richard Rumble. We were all in a class that was being taught out in California. And we were all part of the Sleepwalkers system, because I ran a Sleepwalkers chapter here in Columbus for a long time. And so that's how Hypnothoughts Live was on my radar. And that's really when things started kicking off. I got to meet some people in person, got to learn some brand new stuff. Got to meet you, got to meet a lot of other wonderful people. And it's been a heck of a ride. I've been doing hypnosis, like I said, for 20 years. I've been doing it full time for about 5 years now. I was doing it part-time after work, weekends. Doesn't leave much in the way of a life, but I've been doing what I can to make up for it the last few years.
There's something in the middle of what you said, by the way, that I want to point out, just because I think it's wisdom. When you got certified in hypnosis, this is my experience as well, by the way, and I have this thought that a certificate in hypnotherapy is actually a license to begin. You know, it's like now we've done enough stuff, we've gotten you started, we've told you some things about it. Here's the world, you know. So you've got the minimal requirements to enter into an inquiry into the nature of consciousness and change, and then you go out and you create a practice, and it becomes your own unique thing in your own unique way. I don't know any two practitioners that really work alike, actually, except, well, maybe a couple that have been really regimented by some system that says that has a certain number of paths, for example, or or whatever it might be. But
yeah. I have no idea what you're talking about, Michael.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh no, me too. So I get that. So Jeffrey, let's talk about metaphors.
Okay, let's do that. A number of years ago, back when I still had this magical thing called free time, I went on a vacation. It was the second one I had ever been on. My family didn't really do vacations. And I'm still learning to do vacations. Basically, if I'm going somewhere, I'm going to learn how to do something. And I went to Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina, just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. The actual mailing address, I believe, is Swananoa. There will not be a quiz on how to spell that later. And it's a really cool place. It's a neat school. It's this tiny, tiny school. And I went to a small liberal arts college, but this is like somebody cleared some trees, plopped down a college and said, we're done. There's no town. There's no nothing. The closest place to get gas is like 4 miles down the road. And it's every summer they do these themed music camps. And I went to Celtic Week one year, where, having learned my lesson the previous year, because it's like Hypnothoughts, it's all the classes you can eat for the same price. You really don't want to be taking too many different instrumental classes. So I took bouzouki, which has a place, if you're thinking, isn't that a Greek instrument? Yeah, it is. But it found its way into Celtic music. And I also took a storytelling class. And it was really interesting to me that the storytelling teacher and the bouzouki teacher were both talking about the same thing. The bouzouki teacher was talking about the structure of folk music and how folk songs, sort of by their nature, are very simple. The example that I like to use is Mary Had a Little Lamb, which in the verse has the structure A, B, A, C. And I'm not a singer. There's a reason why I'm not a singer. You're about to discover what it is. Because, we know the song Mary Had a Little Lamb. Mary had a little lamb. That's A. Little lamb, that's B. Mary had a little lamb. That's the A part again. Whose fleece was white as snow, which is C, which is a little bit like B, but not really. And as long as you work within that structure, you can add trills and fills and accidentals and incidentals and all sorts of interesting things to make it your own, but it's still easily identifiable as Mary Had a Little Lamb. If you're a person of a certain age, as a lot of us are on here, you may be familiar with the works of a Mr. Tom Lehrer, who wrote, I had no doubt that you would be. For those of you who don't know, Tom Lehrer was a mathematics instructor at Harvard. He was in the Cal Poly system for a while. He's still alive. I looked last week because I was thinking about playing one of his pieces during my presentation at Hypnothoughts. But he did this beautiful thing, and I won't play it here, but you can look it up. It's on YouTube, of variations on My Darling Clementine as done in the style of other composers. From jazz to Rodgers and Hammerstein, to a more European art music, what we typically call classical music style. And it's all very identifiably My Darling Clementine, but the corners of the box are filled in a little differently. The corners are that basic melody. What goes on within those corners is what makes it unique and what makes it special. The storytelling guy was doing the same thing. He used the example of Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel is about two kids who, depending on the version, if you're listening to like the original Brothers Grimm version, there's a reason why we use the word grim to mean kind of creepy. The original Grimm version of most fairy tales are really dark. The kids are like led into the woods to starve and die because they're too much of a burden, but they find their way back because they put down pebbles. Well, they can't get a hold of pebbles when it's done to them the second time, so they put down breadcrumbs, and the breadcrumbs get eaten by birds before they can find their way back. And then there's a wicked witch and a thing full of candy and all these different things, and it all happens in the forest in Austria. Well, there's no real reason why those two people have to be named Hansel and Gretel. There's no reason why it has to happen in Austria. There's no reason why it has to happen in the woods. There's no reason why it has to be a witch in a gingerbread house. You just have to create these certain beats, as they call them in script writing. And as long as you keep those beats the same, you can fill in the middle with whatever it is that makes sense to you and the person you're telling the story to. This is why Aesop's fables have continued to be told from generation to generation. Hypnotist Bob Martell just wrote a book about the hypnotic use of Aesop's fables, and why these stories from the Bible resonate to this day, and why we're still teaching Shakespeare hundreds of years after he kicked. Because the basic framework of the story, the corners, are still relevant.
Which, by the way, is why we are still reading Dave Ellman and Milton Erickson. That's what.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, can I just interject? I love this because at least my own music background, what I know is there's very simple rules for how to write the blues. My man's awful, treats me so damn mean. My man is awful, treats me so damn mean. He's the lowest man that I have ever seen. Right? There's this, call and response, and the systematic nature of that is a key for being able to do it over and over and over again.
And that repetition is very indicative of stories, because the blues typically tell a story that is transmitted orally. It's why folk music is very simple, because you have to hang on to those corners in a culture where there was no written music, which is also true of a lot of blues music, which is true of a lot of these stories. I recently read about how someone has done a textual analysis of some of Homer's work. And I could spend quite a bit of time talking about whether or not Homer was a person or multiple people or nobody at all. But the textual analysis indicates that the reason why there are these, as they say, epithets of people, brave and glorious this, or wise and beautiful that. And they keep doing that over and over, even though you heard that just a couple minutes ago, is because they're sort of markers for the storyteller to keep the rhythm of the story going. As for me, I am a guy who's curious about lots of stuff. It means that I have tons and tons of unfinished projects around the house, but it also means that I have collected a ton of heretofore pretty much useless information, which now I get to use to tell stories to my clients. It's like that guy who, he keeps that 3-foot length of 2x4 that he didn't use in some project because I'm going to need that one day. And, you know, it just like lives up in the rafters of the garage until that happens. This is what sort of prompted this way of storytelling. And I should, before I go further, give some thanks. I won't name him by name because he's a client, but to this one particular client, he's in, and I need a better name for this, but I stole this from somebody. I may have stolen this from you, Karen, actually. He's in my hypnosis club. And I've been working with him for a number of years. He comes in once a month and we work on whatever he wants to work on. And he asked me, how do you keep coming up with all these stories that are just perfect? And first of all, I thanked him for being so incredibly observant. But then I had to think about, how do I answer his question? Because I want to give him an answer. He deserves one. And so I had to think about it. And it's like, well, I guess I do this. And then after he left, I whipped up my voice recorder and I recorded it because that sounded really smart. And I wanted to keep it before I forgot it. And that's sort of where this came from. You work from the four corners. You start with, you know, what does the client believe now? What do they need to believe in order for them to achieve the change they want? And how can I get them there in a way that's going to make sense, at least to the unconscious mind?
Okay.
And that it's okay not to be perfect at the beginning of the new behavior right away, because a lot of people think that you can just throw the switch and all their problems go away. And it's like, well, yeah, except now you've got this new behavior that you've never done before. And just like anything else, you have to practice it. So if it's not absolutely spot on perfect the very first time, that's okay. You'll get better.
So Jeff, can I just check for a second? Because in one sense, this sounds, and I like the idea though, actually, it sounds like the kind of Deus Ex Machina school of hypnosis. You know, that is, where are they? Where do they need to be? And what has to happen? You know, and then you can create something to bring that about. I think what I'm confused about and would like for you to help me with is, as I heard you say those things, I heard three corners. I heard something about what's their current belief, what's the required belief, and what's a vehicle to get them there. Am I missing a piece?
You are. It is that the old original behavior is no longer useful, appropriate, or necessary. So we start from there.
Okay.
That it was necessary, or at least appropriate, or could have been appropriate in some context. And here we're going back into, you know, the presuppositions of NLP, where everything they've done up to this point was inspired by a positive intention. Everything they've done up to this point would be appropriate in some context, just not this one. Everything they've done up to this point has worked perfectly at getting them what they were getting. And then, based upon that, what do they need to believe to make the desired change now?
Okay.
That moves forward into the next set of four corners, that the old behavior is no longer useful, appropriate, or necessary. It is safe and appropriate to do something new instead, that they have or can get the resources necessary to make the new behavior work, and that it's okay not to be perfect right from the jump.
Nice. Lovely.
So I'm really interested in hearing you turn that theory into a story.
Okay. This is one that I've used a bunch, and you can really use it for anything that somebody was doing that is no longer appropriate. I was really inspired by something that Duff McDuffie said at the IMDHA conference several years back. Again, sort of going from a mechanistic standpoint of hypnosis, where there's this almost mechanical process, and that if you can take the old anchor and have that now mean something new and different and divert that somewhere from where it used to go, that's a great place to start. And so that's kind of what I do with this story. And feel free to use this story, adapt it however you want. I never tell it the same way twice, not on purpose, just because I never really need to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can get 5 hypnotists in the room who use the Elman induction, and we're going to do it at least 6 different ways.
Yeah.
So here's the story. Somewhere in Southeast Asia, I like to be vague on these because there's always going to be somebody in that chair who knows way more about Southeast Asia than I do. They're going to know. It's like, they don't have temples like that in Laos.
Oh, it's Thailand.
Care?
Yeah, it's Thailand, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. It's right on the border with Laos and Thailand. Up in the hills with Hmong. Sure, let's do that.
Lousy border.
There's this temple in Southeast Asia. And if I'm feeling a little unsure of my footing when I tell a story, I preface it with this. I heard this story a bunch of years ago. I wasn't paying that close of attention, so I didn't get some of the details. And I don't really know how much the person who was telling me this really knew about the topic. But the story really resonated with me, and I want to share it with you. Which means if I get anything wrong, it's not my fault. And there was this temple in Southeast Asia, and it was full of monks, as temples tend to be. And they would have this call to prayer 3 times a day. And there was this gigantic bell that was hung from this great big beam across the top of the temple. And when it came time for prayers, several monks would pick up this great big timber and they would ram it into the bell to cause the bell to ring, and it would vibrate throughout the building and throughout the valley. And it would call all the monks who were out working in the various places where they were working, because I don't know, they were coming, and they would call them in to gather for prayer. And this went on for centuries until one day, somebody noticed that there were some cracks starting to form in the temple walls, and they couldn't figure out what was causing them. It's just like one day they were there and they were getting worse very quickly. And because these monks were in the world, but not of it, they called in an architect, and the architect called in a structural engineer, and they went around the building and they were looking and looking and looking. And they happened to be there one day when they had the call to prayer. And the structural engineer said, well, there's your problem. And they were faced with this conundrum, because this bell, this call to prayer, was not just something that was part of their community, that it was part of the surrounding community, not just the temple, but the village as well. And it was all interrelated. And they had to make a decision. They knew they didn't want the temple to fall down, but they knew they couldn't keep ringing this bell. And they had to keep calling people in from the various fields and whatnot to come to prayer 3 times a day. And they were thinking, what do we do? What do we do? We've always done it this way. What do we do? What do we do? And one of the younger monks said, well, you know how we got a hold of this architect and that structural engineer over there? Because we picked up our cell phones and we called them. There's this thing called group text, and we could just call everybody that way because it's the 21st century and we can do that now. And they thought, I never would have thought of that. And so that's what they do now. They kept the bell in place as a reminder of where they came from and how things work. But they got rid of that great big pole so that nobody's going to strike the bell anymore. And they got some people in and they repaired the building and they patched it up. And yes, it's not perfect, but those seams that you can see, those places where the cracks used to be, are a reminder that sometimes it's not the right thing to do, even if it's the way you've always done it. And just like those monks in Southeast Asia, so you now can begin to feel comfortable adapting this new behavior, and so on and so forth. And they told 2 friends, and so on and so forth.
Well, there you go. And by the way, I heard it slightly differently, because when I heard it, it was a psychological story. And every time they rang the bell, the monks salivated. because you know, salivation is a part of the religious experience, I guess. And that's yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot. It wasn't the story that I thought you were going to tell, by the way. It's kind of
What
interesting.
was the story you thought I was going to tell?
Oh, there's one about the monastery that has at the center of it this big a big clay statue of the Buddha. and it was kind of the center of their devotional life. And then it was the Thai government came in and they were going to put a new highway in. This is actually, I think, a true story.
Yeah, I've heard this. I don't remember it, but I've heard it.
Oh, okay. So they were going to put a new highway in, and so they had to move the statue. And they put the statue on rollers and they started rolling it, down the street. They were just, going to move it to a new location. And then it started to rain, which isn't really good for clay statues, as you might imagine. So they covered the thing up with a tarp, and went to bed for the night, figuring that they'd get on it the next morning. But during the night, the abbot was concerned about the statue, and he came out with a flashlight to check it out and make sure everything was okay. And he lifted up the tarp and shined the flashlight out along it, and found some cracks forming in the statue. And he noticed that as he shined the light into the cracks, that it reflected back at him really brilliantly and brightly. And that was very confusing to him. So he found a little obscure place where he could test it out, and began to just chip a little of this clay away to see what was inside. And it turned out that in this 15-foot clay statue of the Buddha, there was actually a 12-foot golden statue of the Buddha that had been hidden underneath the clay exterior for centuries, that they didn't even know was there. And so, of course, then it becomes a metaphor about the brilliance that is within you, for example, or any number of possible uses. I like this. Do you hear what? Oh, sorry, Karen, go ahead.
Another version is I use Michelangelo for that. Michelangelo, the sculptor, right?
Yeah.
He, when they asked him about it, he said the way he handled it is he could see a big block of marble and he could see the masterpiece inside, right at the very center of that. And he would chip away and sometimes big chunks, sometimes tiny things as small as a grain of sand, and he'd chip away until he got to the masterpiece that's inside. Yada, yada, yada.
And the lesson to be learned from the story is that Michelangelo was a chiseler.
Depending on the client you're working with and what they need.
Jeffrey, I wonder, Jeffrey, if this is true for you, that something that I've always done is collect stories. I find it really useful, and you've got this one that you tell, often, for instance. And sometimes, if I hear a metaphor, the thing that I ask myself is, or I'm looking at a situation rather than that a client's presenting, and I think a lot of hypnotists do this, and we sort of ask ourselves, what is a metaphor for this? What is a metaphor for this? By the way, the hero's journey comes in pretty handy too, as a way of generating metaphors and stories, but yeah, so what's a metaphor for this? And we might come up with some interesting things. But it also has occurred to me since I learned all that, was to start thinking, as I saw unusual things in the world, to ask myself the question, what would this be a good metaphor for? So that I can see something happening and go, gosh, I can make up a story about that, and I could use it in this way or that way, and how helpful. So you can build a big grimoire, if you will, of the Grimm, because the brothers Grimm. That's the grimoire is named after the brothers, of hypnotic metaphors that way.
Oh, absolutely. And a great way to get comfortable with this way of telling stories is to tell jokes. Because jokes typically are passed down orally. Yes, I know we have joke books, but jokes are typically passed down. One person telling a joke, another person tells a joke. And there's a lot of these cues that we use to remember things. There was a joke that I heard a bunch of years ago, and I retooled it very, very slightly because the time that I remember telling this joke the most was actually when I was at my NLP Master Practitioner training. And I took my Master Prac training up in British Columbia, Canada, from Steve Boyley, who is mostly retired at this point. But Steve knew that pretty much nobody came to his training from Prince George. Everybody came in from somewhere else. And so Steve was kind of your host for the week. And quite often he would invite everybody over to his home the final night of the class. And we were out there in his little patio area. And I told this joke. I'll just point out for those of you who aren't familiar with Canada, that one of the easternmost provinces of Canada is Newfoundland. And the people from Newfoundland are often referred to somewhat derisively as Newfies. And the Newfie joke is very common, much like how, well, as Karen will attest, the Wisconsinite joke is very common in Chicago. The Sheboygan joke, same kind of thing. So I turned this into a Newfie joke. These two Newfies are walking through the woods. This concludes the customization of this joke. And they found this huge hole in the ground, just this great big hole out of nowhere. So deep, so dark that you couldn't possibly see the bottom. And because, well, gosh, you can't leave a hole like that unexplored, and they weren't about to crawl down in it, they started throwing stuff in there. And they threw in a branch that they found, and it fell deeper, deeper, deeper down into that hole, so deep that you could never, ever hear it hit. And they took a rock and they threw it into the hole, and it fell deeper, deeper, deeper down, so deep that you couldn't possibly ever hear it hit. And one of these guys went off to try to find something big. He said, maybe if we find something big, we'll hear when it hits. Maybe we're just not throwing something big enough. And he comes back a couple of minutes later, and he's dragging this railroad tie. He's dragging this railroad tie across the ground. And he throws the railroad tie into this great big hole, and it goes deeper, deeper, deeper down. It went so deep that you couldn't even possibly hear it hit. And then all of a sudden, here comes this goat, just trucking through the woods, running faster than they ever thought that a goat could go. And the goat goes diving into the hole, and it goes so deep and deep and deeper down that you could never possibly hear it hit. And the two guys are standing looking at each other going, what was that? And a few minutes later, this guy comes up and says, hey, have you guys seen my goat? And they said, well, we saw a goat, and it went running through the woods and went jumping into this hole over here. And the guy said, oh, no, that couldn't have been my goat. My goat was tied to a railroad tie.
That's great. That is lovely. I'm looking
Not
at
the word I'd use to describe that joke, but okay.
Nice. I'm searching. I don't know what you can see as you look for me, but as if you see me on the screen, but somewhere back here, I don't know. Oh, I know, because the presenter series, I guess, in the archives of the virtual chapter, by the way, there is an interview that we did a while back. It's longer ago than I realized, actually, with Bob Martell. You had mentioned his book about Aesop's fables as well. I know, folks that we have in our audience here, people that have just barely gotten certified in hypnosis, and we have some folks that have been doing it so long that they've forgotten how to spell it. And I think the question remains for a whole lot of people. So this is very interesting. I've heard about metaphors. I've heard about telling stories in hypnosis, but I haven't really figured out how exactly, because there must be a right way, right? This is the thing. How exactly do you fit them into a hypnotic session?
I'm so glad you asked.
Wasn't that just a deepener that Jeffrey did? And how many times did you repeat deeper, deeper, deeper down? I mean, that could be your whole deepener right there.
Oh, it absolutely could. But that was just sort of a cue that brings you back to that point. And it's a way for me to move the story along. That's all that is. Like I was talking about how, the Iliad and the Odyssey are both sort of written in that same sort of style. And there's tons and tons of translations of that. There's one that was done back in the Victorian era. I'm not going to remember who wrote it. The whole thing was done in verse. It rhymed. And, they didn't have to go chasing all over the place to get those rhymes. If you set that down with a more or less straight up translation into English, it's pretty much line for line exactly what happens. They must have put a ton of work into doing it. I don't think that it's better, but that's really when, in that time when you said poem, that's what a poem was. And so that's what they turned it into. Mm-hmm. And I don't speak or read Greek, and I have no aspirations to do so. But I've read some pretty good translations, or at least skimmed them, just to see the parallels, to see how they did. And in some of these, they really do kind of harken back to that very rhythmic kind of way of learning. I've been playing music for a lot longer than I've been doing hypnosis, and it's mostly of the folk music variety. And those corners of the song are really important to, get the basic melody down. Once you've done that, then you can do all the fancy stuff that you know how to do to make it sound real super cool. But the session that I used to play with, we were just more concerned about getting to the end of the song and nobody getting hurt. So we'd focus on those corners. We really weren't very good. We broke all the rules. We'd have like 5 drummers drumming at the same time, and maybe 2 of them could keep a beat. So yeah, you got really good at focusing on just sort of what you were doing and letting everything else just go away. But it was a good time. And that's how I wound up at this thing. For those of you who might be interested in attending that camp, by the way, it's called the Swannanoa Gathering, and it's at Warren Wilson College. It has been virtual for the past couple of years for fairly obvious reasons, but fingers crossed, it'll be live once again in person. And it's a great time. You get to hang out with some top people in their field and party with them afterwards. Not unlike a lot of the conferences that we have, like Hypnothoughts or IMDHA or Mid-America or ICBCH or the Guild Conference or any of the other gatherings of hypnotists that we have. Full disclosure, the first hypnosis conference I ever attended, can't forget Heartland, because that's one of the ones I go to every year. But the first hypnosis conference I ever attended was Hypnothoughts Live, the very first year. And I regret not having done so sooner. I think I would have gotten better at what I do and certainly improved my networking had I done so. Your mileage may vary.
Jeff, I remember at the beginning of my own career as a trainer or a teacher in hypnosis, I was interested in helping students to recognize that that hypnosis wasn't just the thing that they'd been told that it was, about deeper, and you're in my power, and all that stuff.
It's not.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's a little more to it, but and by the way, my undergraduate degree was in composition and linguistics. And I was really attracted to oral interpretation, for example, as a wonderful thing. So, the way that words sound, the way that they flow, all of that kind of stuff is relative to the idea of creating an experience for people. In my classes, what I did at the beginning was I got some drummers and some African drummers and dancers that John Grinder had introduced me to, and I was so glad to have them come in. And they were the beginning of the hypnosis training. So the drumming would go, and the students were theoretically supposed to dance, and they all approached it in their own way. Some of them, like stood up against the wall forever, and then they'd start to move a little bit, and finally, find their way into it. And without the realization yet that this is the development of a trance experience. Oh my God, I'm starting to lose my train of thought in the middle of this. But I think that when we are telling stories, we are building an experience. Oh, I know what it is. I replaced the drummers and dancers after a few years. I wasn't able to get them all the time, but I had a woman that came in that was an African storyteller. And she was a witchy woman, and people would sit in a circle and she would start telling her story. And you were talking about festivals earlier. I have this, if you go to any kind of like a storytelling festival, and there are certainly such things as you said, I think that's what you're going to find is one induction after another, that is storytelling to draw you into an experience that hopefully will, make some, lights go off or on, or whichever way they go.
Well, I mean, it all comes back to the transderivational search. If you think about the story that I told, I wasn't very specific about that temple. I didn't say what it looked like. I didn't say how big it was. Is it open? Does it have a roof? What does the bell look like? I said some things were big and small, and there was a big piece of wood. I didn't say how many monks had to pick that piece of wood up, because I want the client to make that representation inside their mind. Yeah. And I use the word representation rather than picture simply because it may or may not be a picture. It might be a feeling. It might be an understanding. The number of high school kids that I've helped out of whatever block they had just by saying, you know, every time the teacher says, picture this in your mind and you have trouble with that, just imagine how it feels. I can do that. Yeah. Go. You're able to do that. Yeah, I can do that all the time. Yeah. Just do that. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So we've got like 45 minutes that we got to kill because your mom paid for an hour. So what else do you want to work on?
Yeah.
But going back to that question that you'd asked me a while, how do you put this in a session? Because when I was originally going to talk about sort of the nucleus of this idea, I was still sort of kicking it around, trying to figure out, how do I explain what I do? Because I've been holding this back for a long time because I've been doing this for a long time, this process, but I couldn't explain it. It's almost like teaching someone how to tie your shoes. Once you've done it enough times, you don't think about it anymore. And then it's like, you do that. Any questions? But I had to break it out into a way to help people put it into context. And so I came up with this thing that I call what the heck to say when you don't know what the heck to say. And it's just a 12-step process. It's not, as I said those words, I realized, God, 12, that's going to sound really overwhelming to a lot of people. It shouldn't. It's all stuff that you already do. It's just a systematic way of doing it. You do an induction. We pretty much all start out with an induction one way or another, whether it's conversational, whether it's formal, whatever it is. And because I have way too much NLP training, the next step is single disassociation future pacing. Imagine looking at a future version of yourself in the mirror. That's what that means. And think about the most important reason why you want to change. Then there's a bunch of just straight up direct suggestion. Instead of that, you're going to do this and you're going to like it. Then I tell the story. Then I do the because part of the story. Because you can see the parallel between the character in this story and you, and it resonates with you and it makes sense, and you understand this consciously and unconsciously. Now you can do this new thing. Excuse me, the new resourceful outcome. I'm sitting here drinking my Diet Fago here, and it's coming back on me a little bit. You then anchor the new resourceful outcome. Everybody does anchors their own way. I like to do it with something organic, something that's going to happen in their life, whether they mean to have it happen or not. This is one of those every time you see the color red type things. Really, really helps do an ecology check beforehand to make sure your client isn't colorblind. And I'll leave it to you to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't seem overt to you, because we do like to, as a profession, not always, but a lot of us try to be, like slick and sneaky. And yeah, I meant to do that. One of my teachers once said, if anything good happens within 3 miles of a hypnotist, the hypnotist should take credit for it. And I'm not averse to that. But you anchor the new resourceful outcome to whatever you want. It could be a physical sensation. It could be an awareness to part of the body. You could do finger anchors like Tony Robbins. You've got more direct suggestions. You already did that. It's just the same thing only over again. Kind of like that A part for
Mary's Little Lamb.
Mary Had a Little Lamb. I couldn't remember which song I used this time. That's the problem with mixing this stuff up. You got to remember what you did this time. The biggest benefit of the change, which may or may not be their most important reason for wanting the change, because you have them imagine actually being in the future this time. Being in the future, having the change, living with the change for a while. What's the best thing about that? Maybe it's the thing you thought it was going to be. Maybe it's something different. Here's one of my favorite phrases. One of these days, I'm going to write a hypnosis book, and there's going to be a chapter in there called Things to Say When You Don't Know What to Say. And one of those things is, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. Takes all the pressure off, and the unconscious mind heard everything he said. It's just like the judge saying, the jury will disregard that statement. Yeah, sure they will. You can then have them step into that future self, sort of like the circle of excellence, absorb that change. You can do it physically. You can have them do it mentally. Then you do an emergence, and my emergence sort of locks in the change. This is something I learned from Mark Cunningham, and it's a combination of what he does and some stuff I learned from Ann Spencer. But the last number is, and only when you know, this is the way that I phrase it, and only when you know that each and every one of these thoughts, ideas, suggestions, understandings, and realizations that you've experienced here today has been fully and completely installed, integrated, and activated throughout every single one of your own beliefs, habits, and behaviors. Only then will you open your eyes when I say the number 5. Eyes open, alert, and aware, feeling fantastic. How do you feel? Not leading at all. No, not me. I wouldn't do that. Sneaky, not me.
Yeah.
Are they not going to open their eyes if they didn't get the change? No, they're going to open their eyes no matter what. But it helps to just sort of put a nice little bow on everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
I want to mention something, Jeff, if you don't mind, from observation that I was thrilled to see. I didn't watch you or hear you or notice you dropping into any kind of hypno voice to tell your story. As a matter of fact, you acted out your story. You brought the story to life. Please tell me that's the way you do it, even when your client is in deep trance hypnosis.
That's the way I do that part of it. I'm a preacher's kid. I just, by luck of genetics, I've got some good architecture that allows me to have a nice, relaxing hypno voice that I can use and can trot out whenever I need to. And my office has a window to the outside. It's on the first floor. I can pretty much guarantee, it's like washing your car to make it rain. I can pretty much guarantee that they're going to be mowing the grass when I've got a client in there. So I work with my clients in headphones. I've got headphones with a mic on it. And because in an earlier career, I was a recording engineer, I'm comfortable with how I sound because I've heard my voice recorded a bunch. And I know how to work a mic, the mic dynamics. And so I'll start off and I'll play some nice relaxing music in the background. And I just run the whole thing off my phone. And I'll just be sitting there and, you know, I'll do the induction. I'll start off in my normal voice. I'll sort of drop down into a nice relaxing thing, because when I was at my NLP trainers training, one of the assistant trainers took us into this little side room where they were doing special secret stuff for the assistant trainers. And they had this room full of oscilloscopes. And they had microphones hooked up to the oscilloscopes. I don't really know exactly how this worked because I'd really love to do this sometime. But the trick was that if you could modulate your voice into a way that would essentially make a circle on the screen of the oscilloscope, this was supposed to be like the optimally hypnotic tone.
Mm.
And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I walked up and I just sort of did the thing that I always do. And nice circle right there in the middle of the screen. And nobody else could do it, even the assistant trainer, which might explain a couple of the ways that he treated me for the rest of that week. But because like you, Michael, I'm also blind in one eye and my eyes don't point in the same direction a lot of times. And he kept saying, you're not looking at the room. I am with the eye that works, man. You're going to have to trust me.
Yeah.
And he finally, like the last day, I finally figured it out. Good for you. That's awesome. I had it figured out before you did, but that's okay. You're still a good person. And me, snarky, sarcastic, not at all. I've got a shirt that says National Sarcasm Society, like we need your support. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll do that, but I weave that in and out because I use, like I said, I did this part-time for a long time. The first client I'd see would be at 6 o'clock in the evening. They'd just come off work. If I did the entire session talking like this, I can guarantee you they would fall asleep before I got to even the direct suggestion. So I had to be modulating and moving in and out. And, you know, one of my inspirations for telling stories is stand-up comedians. The way our house was built when I was a kid, the house I grew up in, I had the upstairs all to myself. The master bedroom was on the first floor. I don't have siblings. And so my bedroom was upstairs. So if I wanted to have a record on kind of low, yes, it was records back then, I could do that. And I got into this habit of listening to comedy albums as I went to sleep. And just listening to the way that they would tell stories and weave in and out. People like Robin Williams and George Carlin and Richard Pryor and Steve Martin, I was just amazed the way that they could take these stories and just weave them in and out and go up and down and in and out and be big and huge and projecting and quiet and small just from one moment to the next. And it's not a decision that I made necessarily. It's just the way that I work.
Sure.
And it works for me.
You know, you mentioned being a preacher's kid, and I think that really is certainly another part of it. I can think of all the great preachers that I can think of, or orators. You know, the question is, how do you use a tonality to move a room? And of course, Karen's got this great voice because her experience on the radio and stuff makes her really compelling. And to me, now this is one of the places where I break all the rules of hypnosis in terms of I just don't buy the metaphor entirely. I think there are so many different ways to talk about it. I don't really talk about depth of trance. What I talk about is degree of engagement. And I think if you tell a compelling story, it's like the rest of the world, this is the only game in town right now. The rest of the world has fallen away. And to me, that's a lovely definition of hypnosis. On the other hand, then when you stop telling your story and you shift off into your voice, there's another part of me that thinks, oh my God, we're going up the hill on the escalator or on the elevator, on the roller coaster rather. Here comes again. And I know that I'm going to start to make some internal adjustments because we're about to go into another shift in state.
You're absolutely right. And again, not really something that I do on purpose, just because I kind of picked up by osmosis. We didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid. I'd check out albums from the library and I'd record them on cassette. Remember cassettes? Good times. I've still got some pencils with some marks on them from when I had to tighten them up in them. Yeah, the younger people on there are going, I don't understand what do pencils have to do with recording?
Google it.
You're better off not knowing, really. I actually had one of those like Radio Shack branded cassette like tighteners. And I've still got some cassettes around here somewhere. And in fact, I had somebody ask me the other day, why is this cassette deck out here in the middle of your living room? Because I was dubbing off a bunch of cassettes for Rex Sykes last year and I didn't have a reason to put it away. So it lives here now. It's art. That's what it is. It's art.
It's a curiosity. It's a conversation piece.
Exactly right. That's what it is. Sure. Let's go.
I've been doing hypnosis so long that originally the recordings that I had were on piano rolls.
I just want to say real quick before we get too far, there weren't any questions in the chat room, Jeff, but Catherine did put in here, and I think you should hear this or see this. I am brought to tears by your story and by your blessed opportunity to work with our blessed opportunity to work with our clients. What a nice thing.
Catherine. Yes, that's very nice to say. There's one part of this that I can't teach, and it's the sort of loading of the hopper with ideas so that when it comes to fill those four corners with some detail, you've got something to put in there. But you don't need to be creative, whatever that word means. You just have to be aware of some stuff. We're all more creative than we think, because if you think about some of the stuff that you know beyond the level of having to think about it, there's some rudimentary things about physics that we all kind of understand if you've paid any attention at all to the way you walk through the world. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You throw something into a puddle and it's going to make some ripples. You shake something hard enough, it's going to fall apart. And if you start from there, you can create a story that's got some nice visual cues and some nice kinesthetic cues and some nice auditory cues. And I try to work that in as much as possible. Again, coming from an NLP background, that's where I started. I try to sort of pick up my client's primary representational system. And if you're one of those people who think representational systems are crap, well, good for you. I'm glad that works for you. This is what works for me. You do you. And it doesn't matter. I don't know. And it just doesn't matter. I just know that my clients keep coming back, and I must be doing something right. I hired a really good guy to do my website. That might have something to do with it. But we do what we do, and we all tell stories. And if you just open your mouth and let noises come out, eventually you're going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes.
And if you're really lucky, they'll be in that order, but that's okay. Your client's in trance. They'll figure it out.
And every story leads toward resolution.
Yes.
Right. And so yeah, I kind of, every once in a while, I'll tell a client a story that I'm not even sure if it's a good metaphor for this. It just kind of occurs to me that here's this story to tell, and they will have some meaning, because we are meaning-making creatures, and they're the one that's doing the work in the hypnosis session. We're just marking time while they while they create an experience that moves them toward the change they want. Listen, forgive me for just jumping right in like this, but we are actually already at the end of our time. So I just want to give you a minute, Jeff, because I don't know if we took you so far off track that you didn't get to sort of close your loops and do what you'd like. So let me just give it back to you, and if you can find a way to wrap this for us, we really would appreciate it. And
if you can find a way to weave in your favorite NLP book and answer Jennifer's question along the way, that would be great.
Favorite NLP book kind of depends on what my goal is. I am still a big fan of the original, long out of print Bandler and Grinder seminar transcript books. Frogs into Princes, Reframing, the original transformations, not the new one, with all the hippie trippy covers that were edited by Stephen Connie Ray Andreas. Some of the techniques have been superseded by techniques that are faster and perhaps better, but the content is approachable, it's digestible. If you start NLP going into patterns of Dr. Milton H. Erickson, volumes 1 and 2, I hope you like reading stereo instructions. I found those books painful. I read them because back in the day, you used to have to write book reports to get your CEUs from IMDHA. And so I actually read those damn things and never did it again. But I've gone back to Reframing and Frogs into Princes and Transformations again and again and again. I do have a book on, as Michael pointed out, Erickson's dead. But there is Erickson-esque, neo-Ericksonian stuff. And one of my favorite books is Hypnotherapy Scripts, a neo-Ericksonian approach to persuasive healing. And I've got my phone up here because I've got a copy of it on my phone. Okay, here's a pro tip for everybody. Once your clients have their eyes closed, they can't tell what you're doing. And if what you're doing is reading, they can't tell that as long as you're not reading like this off of a page. The book that I referenced here, like I said, I've got a copy right here on the phone, is Neo-Ericksonian Scripts, Hypnotherapy Scripts, a Neo-Ericksonian Approach to Persuasive Healing by Ronald Havens and Catherine Walters. The cover looks like that. Nice. At least one of the covers looks like that. There's another one sort of blue and yellow. And the hard copy that I have is the blue and yellow one. Yeah, there's a couple of things in there that are great. I use the inductions in there every once in a while because after the first session, I tend not to use the full-blown Elman induction because I don't need to. I've already got them anchored to sitting in the chair with the headphones on, listening to the music, listening to my voice. Remember how it felt to be hypnotized? Do that. That's basically what I tell them. I spend a little more time on it, but that's the gist of it. Remember how it felt to be hypnotized? Do that. I'm going to sit over here and talk.
Do you remember, by the way, for different people, we have this happen in different places. Sometimes it happened in Boy Scout camp, maybe. Sometimes it happened out in the woods with your cousins, or whatever it was. But we've all got somewhere where somebody gathered us together when we were kids and we sat in a circle and somebody told a scary story.
Yep.
And the purpose of the scary story was to finally say Bloody Mary, or something, make everybody jump. Right. I think there's something in that, in remembering that, even about using stories and we learned as children to tell those stories in a way that produced an effect. Sometimes I think it's not so much the technique, and this is certainly what you mentioned NLP and these old techniques, and there are newer ones. I tend to think that it isn't the technique anyway, that what it really is the understanding of what's happening behind it.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So, well, listen, this is just too lovely. And we could keep you here another hour, but we're not going to do that. It just means for those of you who, want even more of Jeffrey Richards, we'll just have to get him back here sometime. But I'm also wondering, Jeffrey, you got something going on that we should know about, or is there a way that people can get in contact with you if they should want to do that?
Well, the next thing that I have on deck is probably going to be the ICBCH Winter Conference. Which I'm not speaking out of school here. Richard Nongard has said this publicly a couple of times, will almost certainly not be in Las Vegas next year.
Probably in Orlando instead.
Orlando, he was also talking about Dallas at one point. He wanted to do it in a state that he knows is going to be open, and that is Texas or Florida. So it'll probably, and I was trying to sell him on Orlando because it's cheaper to be there.
Jason's in Orlando. He'll do it in Orlando.
Yeah, Jason's in Orlando. So I'm going to be presenting there. It'll be interesting to see what I'm talking about. One of the advantages of working with a benevolent despot is that they get to decide who's speaking. And I was informed that I would be speaking. And he asked, "What's the title of my talk?" And I made something up off the top of my head. He said, "What's it about?" I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "That's okay. You'll figure it out." I'm still working on that, but I've got till February. It's called the DNA of NLP. And it's kind of going to be like what you were saying there, Michael. It's not. Yes, William Wood has this great thing where everything in NLP is either anchoring or reframing, and he explains it in a way that I am not able to do right at the moment, but I think he's right. But that assumes that some other things are also a given, and those are the things I'm going to be talking about.
Right.
Kind of where the presuppositions come from, why they matter, and how if you just sort of hang your hat on that, everything else kind of happens. And you can come up with your own 3 letters to call what your thing is, whether it's NLP or CPI or whatever it is that you call it. And then you don't have to worry about, Richard Bandler's lawyers coming after you. So
PLN for dyslexic practitioners.
For Hispanics, because I think that's the way they do it in Spanish.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been lovely, and I'll tell you what we're going to do now, Jeff. Oh, by the way,
and how to get in touch with me?
Touch with you, yeah.
Yeah, peakperformancehypnosis.com is my website. I have a contact form on there, but the easiest way to get a hold of me is to go to peakperformancehypnosis.com/call, CALL. Those of you who know Jason Lynette know exactly who I stole that from. I didn't steal it. I paid him a lot of money for that. And you go to that page and you can actually schedule a time to talk with me. There's no cost for that. It's a 20-minute phone call, and we'll talk about anything you want to talk about, or you can fire me off an email through the contact page, and I'll get back to you eventually, probably with an email that says, "Hey, the best way for you to get in touch with me is to go to peakperformancehypnosis.com/CALL and to fill that form out." And so just go ahead and do that. It'll be faster.
All right. So let me just remind everybody, the recording is going to be posted by about noon tomorrow. We're going to be back here next month. We're going to have Greg Beckett, and he's going to be talking about hypnosis with the LGBTQ community. So I'm looking forward to that one. And I think that's just about it for now. So are you ready for this, Jeffrey?
Sure. I had no idea what you're talking about. Sure.
I know. I love that. So what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to open up everybody's microphones so that we can all tell you at the same time, and you can just shower yourself with the cacophony of love and affection and appreciation. So we're going to do that now, and then we will sign off. So thank you again so much. And
thanks for having me. This was great. I had a really good time, and I am genuinely humbled that you asked me to be here.
Oh, well.
We're delighted to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Truly our pleasure. So open up your microphones, everybody, and tell Jeffrey how much you appreciated it. And let's send him off with a smile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
And we'll,
Really great,
Thank
a
you.
lot of fun, enjoyable, spontaneous, and warm.
Thank you so much.
Education.